Welcome back. Where we had left off last time, Dunwallo had successfully unified the kingdom and restored order to the realm. Now Dunwallo had two sons, Belinus and Brenius, who were both highly ambitious and desired the throne. Both had the support of various nobles, and upon the death of their father, Dunwallo, war broke out between them almost immediately. There were many battles across the land, however Belinus, the elder of the two brothers, secured the upper hand in the conflict. At this point in time, friends of the two brothers were tired of the conflict and persuaded them to negotiate a peace. After some discussion, an agreement was met where Belinus would take most of the south, while Brenius would receive Albany and a bit of northern Logria. Additionally, Belinus would hold the crown and be technically ruler of all of Britain. Up in the north, Brenius was bitter about his position and, despite losing the war, still desired to rule the whole island. Given the idea by one of the lesser nobles under him, he arranged an alliance with the King of Norway, in which he had married the daughter of said king. Setting sail, he crossed the seas and was soon married. When Belinus heard of this, he was furious, and saw the move from his brother as an act of war. Immediately he gathered his forces, and marched north, occupying Brenius' lands. Brenius in turn responded by gathering around him an army of his new Norwegian allies, and set sail intent on conquering all of Britain once and for all. The journey back would be far from smooth sailing though. You see, Geoffrey, king of the Danes, had been in love with the Norwegian king's daughter for many years, and he was greatly distressed to hear of her marriage to Brenius. When Brenius departed Norway, Geoffrey followed in pursuit. When the fleets met, a naval battle took place. Amidst the fighting, Geoffrey sailed his ship up alongside Brenius's. He leapt the board and grabbed hold of the Norwegian princess before returning to his own ship to make a getaway. At that moment, a great storm arose in the sea. The ships, regardless of whose side they were on, were scattered in all directions. Geoffrey's ship floated in chaotic currents for 5 days before making land on the coast of northern Logria. There he was met with some locals, and once they realised who he was, Geoffrey, along with the princess, was taken prisoner and brought to Belinus. Meanwhile, out at sea, Brenius had managed to gather his ships, and he made land on the coast of Albany. Soon he received news that his bride and the Danish king were now Belinus' captives. He sent a message to Belinus, demanding that he return to Brenius both the princess and his lands in the north, lest they start a new war. Belinus refused the demands. He gathered his soldiers from across the lands and marched north to face his brother. The armies met in the forest of Cathalarium, and a battle took place. The fighting took place for many hours, with both sides taking heavy losses. Eventually, though, the Britons were successful, and the Norwegians were routed. Brenius fled with the surviving Norwegians back to their ships, and they set sail, travelling south and seeking refuge in Gaul. Back in Britain, the now victorious Belinus summoned all the realm's nobles to a grand meeting in York, where they would discuss what to do with the captured king of the Danes. After much discussion, it was decided that they would demand a yearly tribute from Denmark in return for the king's freedom. The king of the Danes agreed, and swore on an oath to fulfill what was required of him. Then he was allowed to leave with the princess and return to his homeland. Now with the invaders gone, Belinus was left the undisputed ruler of the island. In the new period of peace, he set about constructing a vast road network connecting all the towns and cities from Cornwall to the top of Albany. In these years, the realm prospered greatly. Meanwhile, to the south, Brenius had landed in Gaul, where he met with various local nobles and began to befriend them. Amongst the Gauls was a noble, Allobroges, who had a daughter as his only child. Brenius became his friend and ended up marrying the man's daughter. With time, Brenius gathered a large base of support in Gaul and prepared an army with which he intended to invade Britain. They set sail and with good winds arrived in Britain. When Belinus got word of what happened, he mustered his own forces and marched out to fight against his brother. The two armies met in the field and lined up against each other, ready to fight. At that moment, the mother of the two brothers, Conwenna, ran forward, across the field towards Brenius' side. There she made her way to the son she had not seen in many years, and begged him not to fight. She told him that the banishment had caused him to rise to greater things, now that he was a ruler in Gaul. And she also reminded him that Belinus had sought peace, whilst Brenius had rebelled by travelling to Norway before. Brenius was moved by her words. He removed his helmet and walked out into the field. When Belinus saw this, he ran towards his brother and embraced him. Together they told their armies to stand down, and they made their way with their men to Trinidad. There many celebrations were held. Now that they had raised these armies though, the question came as to what to do with them. The brothers, along with many lesser nobles, eventually came to a decision. They would sail across the channel and use this army to conquer all of Gaul. So at the start of the next year, the brothers, along with their armies, crossed into Gaul with the intent of making war on the other Gallic kingdoms. Initially the army was met by a force of Frankish knights, but after some intense fighting, the Britons and Allobroges were victorious. From there, they went off to rampage their way through Gaul, subduing cities and conquering kingdoms. After a single year of relentless fighting, the brothers had all of Gaul under their control, and had arrived at the entrance to Italy. At this time, the largest power in Italy was Rome, led by two consuls, Gabius, and Porcina. Rome at this time was still small compared to the new empire of the Britons, and so the consuls sent an envoy offering them tribute in order to be left alone. The brothers were happy to receive tribute, and so turned their armies around and decided to invade Germany instead. Once they had entered the lands of Germany, however, the Romans stopped paying tribute and marched in the large army north to take on the Britons and assist the Germans. Now facing a war on two fronts, the brothers split up. Belinus would continue to face the Germans, while Brennus headed south to fight the Romans. Now, let's pause for a moment. I should say that in this section of the book, the upcoming war with the Romans is pretty confusing and doesn't make too much sense. So I will admit, I moved some things around to try and make it work. So if you're a true enthusiast who's reading along with the story, you might notice a few differences there. Alright, back to the story. When the Romans got word that Brennus was marching south with an army, they began to waver in spirit and retreated back to a fortified hill. This allowed Brennus to pass. Belinus' long-ranging scouts got word of this, and he had an idea. Leaving a small portion of his army behind to hold the Germans at bay, he marched quickly south, crossing into Italy. Meanwhile, Brennus had marched past where the Roman army was without encountering them, and had gone straight for Rome. He laid siege to the city. Now the Romans planned to strike the rear of Brennus' army, trapping him between themselves and the city. As they were marching south, however, Belinus arrived and fell upon them unexpectedly. Belinus was swiftly victorious, and the Romans were scattered. He then continued south to join with his brother, and together they assaulted the walls of Rome. The Romans put up a strong fight, however it was a lengthy battle, and they managed to repel the Britons. Then the Roman consuls led a sortie out of the city in an attempt to break the siege. Thus began a great struggle between the two armies, with thousands dying on both sides. Slowly though, the Britons began to gain the upper hand. They broke through the Roman ranks, slaying Gabius and taking Porcina prisoner. The city was then sacked by the victorious army of the Britons. Following the defeat of the Romans, Brennus decided to stay in Italy and rule. There he would become known as a ruthless tyrant. Belinus, on the other hand, no longer desired to fight further. Leaving the Gauls to manage themselves, he returned to Britain to rule in peace for the rest of his years. His remaining years were prosperous, and he founded a new city called Caerusc. Also back in Trinobantum, he had a large tower built. When he eventually died, Belinus was cremated, and his ashes were placed in a golden urn, which was kept in the tower. The throne was then inherited by his son, Gurgiant Brabchuk. He was generally a peaceful and just king. War did break out during his reign, though, when the king of the Danes decided to stop paying tribute to Britain, now that Belinus was dead. Gurgiant travelled with a fleet to Denmark, where he won several battles, killing the Danish king and reimposing the tribute upon the kingdom. Now, on the way back to Denmark, the ships drifted off course and ended up at the Isles of Orkney. They were surprised to find another group of ships there, filled with men, women, and children. When asked as to who they were, people on the ships said they were called the Barclansers. They were exiles from Spain who were looking for a new land to settle and call home. Now, at this time, the Isle of Hibernia was completely uninhabited, so Gurgiant told them they were free to settle the land there. And that's just what those people did, and they still live on the island to this very day. Years later, Gurgiant died, passing the throne to his son, Geoffrey. Geoffrey did a pretty decent job at ruling, but he didn't get up to anything exciting, nor would his next few descendants. He would die and pass the throne to his own son, Caecilius. Caecilius, in turn, would pass it to his son, Cimar. Cimar was succeeded by his brother, Dannius. From there, somewhat controversially, the crown passed to Dannius' illegitimate child, Morvid, who was the son of the king's concubine. Morvid was known to be a pretty ruthless king, who would slay people who displeased him on the spot. During his reign, the realm was invaded by a large army of Moranians, who were a tribe from Gaul. They landed in Northumbria and began to ravage the country. Morvid gathered an army and attacked them. He was victorious in battle and took no prisoners. A little while later, problems began to occur in the Irish Sea, with fishermen giving tales of a vast sea monster which was attacking ships. Morvid decided that he would slay the beast and sailed out into the ocean to find it. He did find the beast, and he fought it, but in the end he was unsuccessful and was eaten by it. Now Morvid had 5 sons, the eldest of which was Gorbian, who inherited the throne. He ruled pretty well, but didn't really do too much before dying, and passing the throne to his brother, Arthgallo. Arthgallo was a cruel and tyrannical king, who taxed the populace very heavily. Eventually many of the nobles in the realm had had enough of his rule, and rebelled against him. The rebellion was successful. Arthgallo was deposed and exiled. The nobles then installed the next brother, Elidure, as king. Elidure was a good king, and he ruled in peace for 5 years. Then, one day out, on a hunting trip in the forest, he came across his exiled brother, Arthgallo. Arthgallo had spent some time in Gaul, trying to gather support, but he had been unsuccessful and decided to return to Britain. Now he was living in poverty, and was trying to repent of his past wicked ways. When Elidure saw him, he took pity on his brother, who he had once been close with, and decided to help him. He had Arthgallo secretly brought into this palace in the city of Alclad. There, Elidure pretended he was very ill and could be near death. He sent out envoys to all the nobles of the land that they should visit him. When they arrived, he arranged that they would visit his chamber one by one. When in there, they were ordered to swear allegiance to Arthgallo, or be beheaded if they refused, and so that was what happened. Once all the nobles had sworn allegiance, he brought them into the main hall, where he presented Arthgallo before them. Then he took the crown from the top of his head and placed it on Arthgallo's. Archelaus then reigned as king for the next 10 years, where he acted quite the opposite to how he was last time he was king. He was peaceful and the realm prospered under him. When he died, the crown returned to Elidor. However, his younger two brothers, Vigenius and Peredur, both desired the throne and so rebelled against him. After several battles, the brothers were victorious, and Elidor was locked up in the tower of Trinavant. The two brothers divided up the realm between them, with Vigenius taking the south, whilst Peredur took the north. A few years later, Vigenius ended up dying, leaving Peredur to rule over the whole island. Then a couple of years after that, Peredur would also die. When this happened, Elidor was brought back out of prison and raised to the throne for the third time in his life. He would rule peacefully for a few more years before eventually dying himself. Then the throne would pass to his son, Gorbian. And now we'll go through another section where there's a whole bunch of kings. So many, in fact, that they're not even going to get unique artwork. After Gorbian, the crown passed to Margan, son of Archelaus. Then it went to his brother, Ennium. Ennion was a terrible king, and in the 6th year of his reign, he was deposed, and the crown went to the son of Vigenius, Idwai. Then it went to Reno, son of Peredur, and then to Gigentius, son of Elidor. He then passed it to his son, Catel, then to Catel's son, Coil, then to Porix, then to Charon. Charon had 3 sons, Fulgenius, Aldad, and Dragius, who each got a turn on the throne. Then the line of Andragius goes Aligid, Caligid, Clito, Gigentius, Merian, Bledan, Cap, Owen, Cecilius, Blegamred, Arthmel, Redian, Roderick, Samuel Penisil, Pyr, Capoia, Tulgirani, and finally Healy. Now Healy had 3 sons, and they, unlike all previous kings mentioned, would actually go on to do things of note. The sons were Lud, Cassiblanus, and Nennius. Lud would inherit the kingdom when his father died, and the main thing he would go on to do was build a large wall around Trinobantum to defend it. Once the wall was built, the city was renamed, no longer called Trinobantum, but instead Caelud. Over the years, this name would eventually be distorted to London. Lud would die, leaving behind 2 infant sons, Androgeus and Tenuteus, who were too young to rule. Therefore, the throne passed to his brother, Cassiblanus. Cassiblanus would become a key player in the next chapter of Britain's history. For in the years since Brennus' invasion of Italy, the then city-state of Rome had recovered and grown significantly. Having recently conquered all of Gaul, one of its greatest leaders, Julius Caesar, now turned his eyes to Britain. Join us next time, where we shall cover the coming wars between the Britons and the Romans. Until then, farewell.